My wife is incredibly apologetic and has been begging me for forgiveness. The room was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of curtains stirred by a passing breeze. I sat at the dining table, staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of me. The hours had stretched into an endless loop of emotions I couldn't escape: confusion, anger, hurt, and the faintest flicker of something I wasn't ready to name. My wife's words still echoed in my mind, their weight almost too much to bear. She had confessed everything, her voice trembling as she laid bare the mistakes she had made. And then, like a dam breaking, she had crumbled, sobbing and pleading for me to understand. Her regret had filled the room like a storm cloud, leaving no space for anything else. For days, maybe weeks, she had been different. There was a fragility in her I hadn't seen before, as though she were carrying a burden too heavy for her to bear alone. I hadn't understood it then, hadn't asked the questions I probably should have. And now I knew why: because deep down, I must have suspected the answers would unravel everything we had built together. The betrayal wasn't the kind of obvious affair that shattered marriages in movies. It was subtler, quieter, a series of decisions that had slowly chipped away at the trust between us. It wasn't physical, but it didn't have to be. Emotional intimacy shared with someone else can feel just as much like a dagger to the heart. And now here she was, promising it had meant nothing, insisting that I was her world, that she had been foolish and reckless but never stopped loving me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take the weight of her apologies and fold them into the fabric of our lives, smoothing over the wrinkles as if they had never been there. But every time I tried, I was met with the cold and yielding truth: I couldn't trust her, not yet, maybe not ever. The foundation we had spent years building felt cracked beneath my feet, and I was terrified it would collapse entirely if I dared to stand on it again. She had been relentless in her attempts to make things right. Notes slipped into my work bag, meals carefully prepared and left for me on the nights I came home late. Her eyes followed me everywhere, filled with a desperation that cut deeper than I cared to admit. But it wasn't the grand gestures or the apologies that haunted me. It was the small moments: the way she hesitated before reaching out to touch my hand, the way her voice trembled when she said my name. Her guilt was a living thing, palpable and oppressive. It hung between us like a curtain, separating the life we had from the life we might still salvage. I couldn't deny that she was trying, pouring every ounce of herself into making amends. But I also couldn't deny the part of me that recoiled from her touch, that flinched at the sound of her voice, that saw her not as the woman I loved but as the person who had hurt me most. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as questions circled endlessly in my mind. Was forgiveness even possible? Could I ever look at her and not see the cracks in our marriage? Or was this the beginning of the end, the slow unraveling of something that had once felt unbreakable? I thought about the good times, the moments that had defined us. The way she laughed when I told her the worst jokes, the way her hand always found mine in a crowd, the way she looked at me on our wedding day as if nothing else in the world mattered. Those memories were still there, vivid and aching in their beauty. But they felt like relics now, distant and unreachable, belonging to a version of us that no longer existed. And then there was the question of myself. I hated the bitterness that had taken root inside me, the way it twisted my thoughts and colored everything she said and did. I had always thought of myself as someone who could rise above, who could see the bigger picture, but now I wasn't so sure. Her betrayal had awakened something darker in me, something I didn't like but couldn't suppress. There were moments when I caught her watching me, her face etched with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just sadness, it was fear. Fear that she had broken something irreparable, that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be able to piece us back together. And maybe she was right. Maybe this was the kind of wound that didn't heal, the kind that left a scar so deep it changed you forever. But then there were other moments, fleeting and fragile, when I saw her for who she was beneath the guilt. A woman who had made mistakes, yes, but who was also human, flawed, and deeply, painfully sorry. A woman who was fighting for me, for us, even as she stumbled under the weight of her own regret. The truth was, I didn't know what to do. Every decision felt like a gamble, every choice fraught with the possibility of further pain. If I stayed, I risked being hurt again. If I left, I risked losing something that might still be worth saving. The balance between those two truths felt impossible to navigate, and I was terrified of making the wrong move. And so, I sat at the table, staring at the cold coffee and the empty room, while the storm raged on inside me. I didn't know how the story would end, didn't know if forgiveness was something I could give or if it was something she could earn. All I knew was that I was standing at a crossroads, and whichever path I chose, there would be no turning back. The days stretched into weeks, and the weight of indecision settled deeper into my chest. It was as if I were caught in a liminal space, tethered to two possible futures but unable to fully commit to either. My wife's presence, once a comfort, now felt like a constant reminder of everything we had lost. Yet, her absence when she left the room filled me with an ache I couldn't quite explain. I began to retreat inward, avoiding conversations that felt too heavy, too loaded with the implications of her betrayal. The apologies she offered so freely, the small acts of love she performed daily, all fell into the same pool of doubt. Were they enough? Could they ever be enough? I found myself questioning whether her actions were rooted in genuine remorse or a fear of losing me. Did she regret her choices, or did she regret the consequences? She, too, seemed caught in her own storm. I'd catch her in quiet moments, staring into nothingness with an expression of raw and filtered grief. It wasn't the kind of sadness that begged for sympathy. It was the kind that came from a place of deep self-loathing. She was trying to carry the weight of her mistakes, but the cracks were beginning to show. One night, I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her head in her hands. The sight of her like that, so vulnerable, so broken, stirred something in me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a flicker of understanding. She wasn't just apologizing for what she had done. She was mourning the damage she had caused, to me, to us, to herself. She looked up when she noticed me, her eyes red-rimmed and brimming with a sorrow that words could never fully express. I walked away, not out of anger, but because I didn't know how to face her without the weight of my own emotions spilling over. I didn't trust myself to speak, didn't trust the words that might come out, but later that night, as I lay awake in bed, her image stayed with me. I realized that in her own way, she was as lost as I was, trying to navigate the wreckage of our marriage without a map. Still, the question remained, was love enough? Could the depth of her remorse and the breadth of my love bridge the chasm that now separated us? Or had the damage already been done, irreversible and insurmountable? I wrestled with these questions in the quiet hours, my mind replaying moments from our past like an old film reel. There had been so much good between us, so much laughter and connection and shared dreams. But those memories now felt like they belonged to someone else, a different version of us that no longer existed. The first crack in my armor came unexpectedly. I was sorting through old photos, searching for a document I'd misplaced, when I came across an album from our first year together. There we were, smiling and carefree, our eyes alight with the kind of joy that comes from believing the world is full of endless possibilities. I felt a pang of longing not just for her, but for the person I had been back then. Optimistic, open-hearted, and scarred by betrayal. But even as I mourned that version of myself, I couldn't deny the love that still lingered. It wasn't the same as it had been in those photos. It was bruised and battered, weighed down by resentment and distrust. But it was there, stubborn and unyielding, refusing to be extinguished. I began to wonder if forgiveness wasn't a single act but a process, a choice made not once, but over and over again, in the face of pain and doubt. Maybe it wasn't about erasing the past but about finding a way to live with it, to let it coexist with the love that remained. In the days that followed, I found myself softening, if only slightly. I started to notice the little things my wife was doing, the way she made sure my favorite snacks were always stocked, the way she folded my laundry with the same care she always had, the way she left the lamp on in the living room when I worked late so I wouldn't come home to darkness. These gestures didn't erase what she had done, but they spoke to the effort she was making, the quiet, and spoken promise that she wasn't giving up on us. One evening, I found myself sitting at the same table where I had once stared at a cold cup of coffee, only this time, I wasn't alone. She sat across from me, her hands folded tightly as if she were holding herself together. The air between us was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It felt like the first tentative step toward something new, something fragile but real. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if forgiveness would ever come fully or if the trust we had lost could ever be rebuilt. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I was willing to try. Not for her, and not for the life we had before, but for the possibility of something better. Something stronger, something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a test of patience and resilience, a delicate dance between the wounds of the past and the tentative hope for the future. Every interaction felt weighted with unspoken truths and cautious attempts to rebuild what had been broken. Trust, I realized, wasn't something that could be demanded or promised. It had to be earned, painstakingly, piece by piece. She kept trying, and I could see the sincerity in her every action. She didn't press me for answers or beg for an immediate resolution. Instead, she gave me space while making it clear that she was there, ready to talk or listen whenever I was. It was as if she had accepted that forgiveness wasn't hers to claim but mine to offer if and when I was ready. And that, more than anything, began to chip away at my defenses. Still, it wasn't easy. There were moments when the pain resurfaced with a vengeance sharp and unexpected, like a splinter buried deep under the skin. A misplaced word, a reminder of the time when her loyalty wavered, would send me spiraling back into anger and doubt. I'd find myself pulling away, retreating into the safety of my own mind, where I could analyze and dissect every moment of her betrayal without interference. But even in those moments, I couldn't ignore the part of me that wanted to believe her, to believe in us. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I stumbled upon a saved note from years ago. It was something she had written to me during the early days of our marriage, a list of all the reasons she loved me. Her words were simple, but they were full of warmth and honesty, a window into the depths of her feelings back then. Reading them now, with everything that had happened between us, felt like opening a time capsule from a different era. I couldn't help but wonder, was that love still there, buried beneath the rubble of our mistakes? Or had it been irrevocably changed, tarnished by the choices she made and the pain they caused? The answer wasn't clear. But, for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that it might not be too late to find out. Slowly, cautiously, I began to open up to her. I didn't dive headfirst into forgiveness. I couldn't, but I allowed myself to acknowledge her efforts, to see the woman she was now rather than the woman who had hurt me. I started to share my feelings, not in a flood of emotion but in small, measured doses. And she listened, her eyes never leaving mine, her expression a mix of sorrow and gratitude. She didn't defend herself or try to justify her actions. She simply acknowledged my pain and accepted her role in causing it. One night, we sat together in the living room, the silence between us no longer heavy but contemplative. She reached for my hand, her touch hesitant but steady, as if asking for permission. I let her take it, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm against mine, a reminder of the connection we once shared and the possibility that it could be rebuilt. As the weeks turned into months, the cracks in our relationship began to mend, not seamlessly, but enough to hold us together. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when I lay awake questioning whether I was making the right choice. But there were also moments of clarity, of genuine connection that reminded me why I had loved her in the first place. We started attending therapy together, a step I had initially resisted but now found surprisingly cathartic. Having a neutral space to voice our fears and frustrations helped us untangle the complex web of emotions that had taken root in our marriage. I began to understand her in ways I never had before, not just her actions but the insecurities and struggles that had led her to make them. And she, in turn, began to see the depth of the hurt she had caused, not as an abstract concept but as something real and tangible. The road to healing was far from linear. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments when it felt like we were right back where we started. But each time, we found a way to come back to each other, to choose the difficult but worthwhile path of rebuilding instead of walking away. One afternoon, as we worked side by side in the garden, her planting flowers, me pulling weeds, I caught a glimpse of something in her that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a quiet determination, a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from her every movement. She wasn't just trying to win back my trust, she was working to become a better version of herself, not for me but for both of us. And in that moment, I felt a surge of something I hadn't dared to hope for: admiration. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It was a slow, deliberate process, like the steady dripping of water eroding a stone. But as time went on, I found myself letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the relentless need to hold onto the pain as a shield. I began to see her not as the woman who had betrayed me but as the woman who was fighting to make things right. One night, as we sat together under a blanket of stars, I looked at her and felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of her actions would always remain, a part of our story that couldn't be erased, but they no longer defined us. What defined us now was the choice we made every day to love, to forgive, and to keep moving forward, together. As the months continued to pass, we found ourselves walking through life with more intention. The days were no longer filled with the tension that once hung thick in the air. Instead, they carried a gentler weight. We had learned, through therapy, communication, and painful but necessary honesty, that rebuilding a marriage wasn't about erasing the past, it was about living alongside it, accepting that it had shaped us, for better or worse. I noticed the small things, the way she no longer flinched when I touched her arm, as though bracing herself for rejection. The way her smile, though sometimes tentative, had become genuine again. The quiet moments in the evenings, when we sat side by side on the couch, no longer weighed down by unspoken words but filled with the peaceful rhythm of two people who had learned to be together in the truest sense of the word. We had grown, both as individuals and as a couple. I realized that her mistakes had not just been hers alone. I, too, had a role to play in the distance that had grown between us. My own silence, my tendency to suppress my needs and emotions for the sake of keeping the peace, had allowed the cracks in our relationship to deepen. I had been so focused on avoiding conflict that I had neglected the very thing that had once made our connection so strong: a vulnerability. In the moments when we were honest with each other, really honest, there was no longer any space for pretending. We spoke about our fears, our regrets, and our hopes for the future, no longer as people bound by the weight of the past but as partners committed to creating something new. Our conversations weren't always easy, but they were real. And in those moments, I felt a sense of closeness that I hadn't experienced in a long time. One evening, after a long day, we sat together in the kitchen, the soft glow of the overhead light casting shadows on the walls. She looked at me, her eyes soft, yet filled with something I couldn't quite name. A tenderness, perhaps, or something deeper, an acknowledgement of all we had survived and all we had learned. "I'm proud of us," she said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. Her voice was steady, but there was an emotion in it that tugged at my heart. I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. I wasn't sure if I was proud of us yet, but I was hopeful. And that, in itself, felt like progress. We still had work to do. There were days when old wounds would flare up, when doubts and insecurities would resurface, but they no longer had the power to tear us apart. We had created something new from the rubble of our past, a relationship built not on perfection, but on growth, on the willingness to confront our flaws and face the consequences of our actions. I didn't know if we would ever fully heal. I didn't know if we would ever reach a place where the past was completely behind us. But I did know one thing: we were in this together. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like that was enough. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I had once imagined, but it was real, raw, and full of possibility. The pain of betrayal still lingered in the background, but it no longer dominated my every thought. The future was uncertain, but that uncertainty no longer felt like a threat. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to try again, and to keep moving forward, hand in hand. And so, as we stood together in the quiet of the night, I let go of the last remnants of my anger, the last traces of the bitterness that had once held me captive. I held her, hand in mine, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we would be okay.